Welcome.
Right?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Thursday, our professional development episodes for
Yes.
Inspiring Classrooms. Last week we talked, what did we talk about
Last week we talked about nature of science
Yes.
and the scientific process as opposed to the scientific method.
That's right. And we promised this week we would talk about questions because it's so hard to get kids to ask questions.
It is. We're used to being asked questions, and even as teachers, we're used to being asked questions. But when you're asked to think of the questions, that can sometimes take some practice.
And it really can. And so we're going to jump back and hit that globe science processes chart again, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to look at that globe science processes chart. We like that. We're just going to use it, deal with it. And as we see it, the first thing on there, they have, it's an environmental program, Observe Nature.
Sure.
And it just fits really well with the way we do our questioning.
Yes.
And so we're going to stick with that. So let's pull up that ask questioning to develop a hypothesis. We're not going to focus on the hypothesis part today, just asking questions.
Right.
That's all we care about for this is the question asking. And they talk about here, brainstorm questions you wish to investigate. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we're focusing on is just brainstorming that. And the selecting a research question we're going to touch on too, right?
We'll touch on that again.
And so now when we do this, Oh yes. We'll explain this.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a process for developing questions that we have adapted from a group known as the Right Question Institute. And we're going to include a link to the Right Question Institute, but they have a question formulation technique, and that's the part that we've adapted then for this presentation today.
We really like this stuff. It was introduced to us at a conference. As I said, we bought the book, we read through that, and we really like the way they present this is good. Yeah. And so this is what we wanted to kind of base this off of because we think it works well.
Right.
All right, and the links that we'll have there in the docs, these two links, that's, what is that?
The one is sort of it's probably the original way that you walk through what we're going to present today. So, and then the other one is just resources that rightquestion.org has available.
There you go. Got to give credit due, right?
Uh-huh.
All right, so we start off with a question focus. Yes. Not a focus question.
No.
A question focus. Something we're focused around that helps generate questions.
Correct.
Right? Mm-hmm. All right, and so, and they say here it has a simple statement, a visual, or how do you say that?
An oral aid, so something that you would listen to or hear. Yeah, it's different from oral, not something spoken, but something you would listen to. Okay. A-U-R-A-L.
And, sorry. But, all right, so it can really be that's a very broad thing, right?
Yes.
But with things, it's talked about being brief.
Yes.
So don't show like a 30-minute video and think it's
definitely
going to be your thing. Provoke or stimulate new lines of thinking. It has to be something that's going to pique of interest and get them thinking and generate questions. And it can't be a question itself.
Correct.
You're not giving them a question, right?
No.
So what we do when we do our workshops, if we're doing a PD with teachers or if we're in a classroom doing this with students, either way, we generally go outside. And we go outside, we pick an area, we're like, this area, that's your question focus.
Okay.
And so, but a lot of things are remote now. Now, if you're in person, we encourage you just go outside the school. Take them outside, pick an area. This is our question focus. This is what we're going to look at. But if you don't, what we did, we took some 360 pictures, and you could do this too of your school or something. That'd be fine, right? And so we took some 360 pictures out in nature. And so you can see this one has a walking path there, has wildflowers, has a wooded area. We'll put links to this. We have a couple different scenes on this. This one is the walking path through the nature, and the second scene on this one is the
it's a bridge over a celery bog.
Yeah, well, it's not actually, it's called celery bog. It's just the name of it because years ago it used to be a bog, but it's marshland.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a bridge over marshland.
Yeah.
I think it's what I called it, is bridge over marshland. And so this, we're going to have it. This way we could do this remotely.
Yes.
We can do this with the class. That way everyone in the class has the exact same scene at the exact same time. And so they all are looking at the same thing to come up with questions, right? And the nice part about it, we use the Google Tour thing. We put it in there with the 360,
right? Because
with the Google Tour, you can stop. It scrolls when you first hit it, which I think is really mesmerizing. So do kids. Yeah. We've had this up in classrooms, and it just keeps the kids like, oh, every time something new comes, right?
Yeah.
But you can stop it. and you can manipulate it and move it around yourself, and the clouds. Hey, there's some clouds.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a contrail. And so you can look at the clouds, and you can move it around to see what's around and stuff like that. And so, all right, that's going to be our question focus, right?
Yes.
But if we're generating questions,
we're going to set some ground rules for generating these questions, though, because first of all, we're going to have a set time that we're going to give students to think of these questions and to view the question focus. Yeah, I said that right. It's not the focus question; it's the question focus.
It's so hard. It has ever since we first saw it, it kills me. With the question focus, because it's what we're focused on to generate questions.
Yes, and that's exactly right. We're trying to practice generating as many questions as possible, and so we set these ground rules for generating these questions because we want to give every student in our classroom a voice, and some students are going to be timid and not as extroverted maybe and not as really even as comfortable with asking different questions, and some students are going to be way too comfortable asking questions and comfortable in making the questions other students ask, interpreting them their own, and maybe rewording them.
Well, we got to stop.
That's exactly right. So our questions for the question focus, our rules for the question focus are: number one, for the time that you're going to give them to view the question focus or to listen to the question focus, if you choose something that they're going to listen to, ask as many questions as you can. And that's the goal. And secondly, and this is probably the most important one, that we're not answering questions that are asked, that we're not placing judgment on questions that are asked, whether you're judging others' questions or your own questions, and that we're not discussing the questions that are asked. And I think that is the thing that is, we're social creatures. We want to comment on.
Discuss is the hardest part.
It is.
You can say, okay, don't judge them, just write them down. You can say, okay, don't answer them, but just start it, because your question leads to more questions.
Exactly. Well, and I know, like, if we were doing this and I would think, oh, wow, yeah, and I would probably want to build on something, and that's fine, but continue that in question form.
But the next one's most important to me, though.
When we do this in person, we have one person that's writing it all out, and we designate the person that's going to write those questions.
Or two. Sometimes it's two people, because if they're asking a lot of questions, it takes a couple.
And you need, and that can be difficult for then the person. And we usually will have a couple of different question focuses.
But that's where that next statement is the most important to me.
It is that you write down every question exactly as it's stated.
That's right.
So when we're starting to throw out these questions, you want the voice of the student asking the question. You might not understand the question the first time that you hear it. We want to write it down exactly as it's stated so that we're not changing the original meaning of the student that was asking that question.
Yes, because if I ask a question, you might have heard that slightly differently, and you might rephrase that.
Yes.
Being that you're really smart and have all this smart big words that I don't have. But you might rephrase that to clean it up, but then you might have changed meaning.
Yeah.
So I've lost my voice.
Yes.
And y'all have lost my buy-in.
Right.
Because I'm going to start pulling myself away because, well, that's not what I was asking. But I don't have the confidence maybe to say, hey, that's not what I was asking. Come on now, this is what I'm asking. And so that's why it's super important to write it down how it's stated.
It is. You don't want to lose that meaning, and you certainly don't want to, inadvertently disengage the students from participating in the activity.
And then the statement thing, we're not write down statements, are we?
We're not making statements. The point of this is to generate as many questions as we can. So statements that are made, we need someone stepping up within that group and saying, okay, well, how could we change that statement or that observation into a question?
And I like encouraging whoever made the statement to come up with that, to that question. I like having the group encourage them to. Right. Sometimes you need help coming up with it, but it's like, oh, well, the path was really dark. Okay, well, can we ask a question about that?
How can you turn that into a question?
Yes.
And again, it's an exercise in question development, and it's something that we all need more practice with.
It really is. And so for this one, all right, so we have this scene.
Yep.
And if you and I are a group, we could start coming up with our questions.
Okay.
Right. And so let's see. I don't know. Okay, I see different types of ground. So will the temperature of the ground be affected by the type of the surface? How's that?
Yeah. Well, we don't judge, right? So I'm going to tell you how it is.
Okay.
Okay. I saw a path. So I want to change that statement into what type of traffic travels on the paved road.
Oh, yes. All right, I see different types of vegetation, some tall trees and some smaller ones. So I want to know, how will the plants and the vegetation impact the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen?
How many species of growing plants here are native to this area?
Oh, there's apartments. All right, so I see apartments. Will the runoff from the will there be runoff from the apartments?
Okay.
So runoff.
Will the soil be different in the place where there's trees versus the wildflower areas?
I can't think of anything.
What about what time of day was this picture taken?
I'm not supposed to.
No.
All right, so there's our questions.
Okay.
We have questions. So if we're in person, obviously we're recording these. If we're doing this remote, we can still encourage questioning remotely. Because we could use something like a Google slide. And so we can type them all into a Google slide.
Yes.
That would be something we could do. And so let's jump to a Google slide. We want to type them in really fast. There, I typed them. Oh, what do you know? Wow, I'm good. Why'd you do that?
Well, I did this because we're going to show, if you're going to do this as a Google slide, you can, if you exit out of presentation mode, you can do some text boxes and save these and put them in the margins. And then as students think of them, they can click on these boxes and add their own questions. And then it's just a matter, once they have them, of clicking and dragging.
Double click on it and ask a question. And then they've done that, and then they double click another one, ask a question.
Yes.
Right, and then all we got to do is move that question over here
That's
into our ask a question in our questions. Right. I love it. Love it. All right, and I like that. I like being able to do that. So we're right here for
So now we've asked the questions. We had our time limit.
Yes.
We worked really hard. We got a bunch of questions written down. And the next step in this process, this question formulation technique, is to go back through all the questions that were asked and categorize them. And so we want to categorize every question that was asked with a C or an O. The C are going to be close-ended questions. These are questions that when we look at them, they could be answered with a yes or a no or any other one-word answer. Can you answer them with one word?
I know in classrooms when I've done it there, I've had them use we've decided what color for, like orange.
Okay.
You know, for if it's open, use orange. If it's closed, use
blue. Or something.
Yeah, blue.
And then
cyan.
Okay. Open-ended questions would require more of an explanation. And so we want to go back through to those questions.
Okay, let's do that.
And which we do. So we have now, what we've done is we've set a background for open-ended and close-ended. If we're doing this virtually, all we did is we just copied our text boxes to this new slide. And now we're going to be able to collaboratively, you could have a bunch of students on this doing this at the same time. So when we said, how will the plants and vegetation impact the amount of CO2 and O2?
That is not a one-word answer.
That's not a one-word answer.
Open-ended.
And so we're going to move that over to open-ended. What about, will the temperature of the ground be affected by the type of surface?
Well, that's just a yes or no, isn't it?
No.
And so that's closed-ended, right?
Well, yeah, I guess the way it's
worded,
it
and
is.
So, yeah, see, you were reading
interpreting
it
differently.
And so we would have the students go through these, but then the next thing we have them do is, all right, now take, I know when the original training, when Mike Chabot did that, he had us take an open-ended and make it closed, take a closed to make it open. Be honest, in the classroom I always skip that. I just do the closed-ended to an open-ended.
Okay.
I don't do the other way, and my guess is it's just practice changing questions.
Yes.
But I'm always worried about time and going through it, so I skip that, whether it's good or bad. And so, speaking of time, but will the temperature of the ground be affected by the type of surface? How can we change that into a open-ended question?
Okay. So how will the temperature of the ground be affected by the type of surface?
It could be as simple as that, right? And so have them change some closed-ended into open so we have more open.
Right.
And so these are questions in the way we do questioning. And then we would have them go through their list. Then after going through their list,
When we had teachers here for
Yeah.
a previous workshop, we took them through this question formulation technique process, but then they helped us develop an evaluation tool for questions that are generated.
Yeah, it's like they just came up with a tool they wanted to use in the classroom. And so we've cut part of that here. One, is this question relevant?
Okay.
But we mean that in the context of our class.
Yeah, and what
right?
the content being taught.
And so, yes, if we're, I mean, it's like, okay, if we're out there for that one, so if we're just generating questions to learn how to generate questions, that's one thing.
Right.
And so at that point, they're all kind of relevant. But then if we're going out and then doing this to come up with a question to actually research,
Yes.
then, I wonder if the asphalt is really hard, that is not a good question for like a biology classroom, or from an anatomy classroom or whatever. And so that's we want questions to be relevant to the content that we're covering in that course.
Exactly.
And so, all right, what's next?
Okay, the next we're going to evaluate them on feasibility for what's being studied. Time and money are the two biggest resources that students are really going to have to
Called
watch.
life.
So, and really everywhere. So the question that's being asked, is it a realistic timeline where we could collect this data and report on it, during our class, while our class is taking place? Or is it something that's going to take months or years, to collect the data?
Because if it's going to take, if it's over a long time, we're not going to be able to study that.
Yeah, right.
You're going to have to pick another question. So, but then budget.
How much?
If it's something that requires sending water samples off to be tested, because you're not doing just like temperature, pH. You're doing something very sophisticated. We don't have the money to do that. All right, so it's outside of our budget of research. Become a scientist, write a grant, and go do that. Educational level. Is that something that's so complicated that we're not really going to be able to figure it out and just collect some data to be able to support that? Is it way too complicated? And the last one is
just remember your sources.
Yes,
sources. When you go and you start looking at this, it's important to look at other research that's being done on these topics and make comparisons between data that's been reported.
Yep. And the last one we have there is Globe Data, because this was a workshop for Globe teachers, and they were doing research projects, submitting them to our Indiana Virtual Science Symposium. We'll put more out about that later on in another video. We'll explain that a little bit later. But right now, we just really wanted to go through the questioning. Remember, every time you do this, that's one small step, right, for them to be able to jump to the next conclusion, to be able to get to the point where they can start asking their own questions. That's where we want to go. We want them to get to the point where they can ask their own questions, and be able to do this independently and be able to generate questions much more easily. And so here's a way that we really like. We found this. We've adapted slightly, and we've just used it for our purpose, and we really, really like it. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, that's this week's video. If you're watching them in order, then we'll see you next week. If you're not, then we'll just click on the next video. Oh, don't forget to subscribe.
Yes.
We never say that.
I know. We need to start saying this.
Subscribe. And tell all your friends. If you don't have any, then tell your family.
There you go.